Hi, my name is Chris and this is Battle Nonsense. In my last video I promised that I will update my netcode analysis data for Call of Duty Blackout, Fortnite, PUBG and Ring of Elysium, as it's been a while since I last tested them. But many of you are not only interested in up-to-date data for these games, you also want to compare them to Apex Legends. Now, while I did not expect to get much different results, I still decided to retest Apex Legends as well, so that you can see how all these games perform right now. Now, today's video is the first one for which I tested 5 different games. But since I already tested these games in the past, I decided to keep this video as short as possible, which means that I won't go into all the details. But if you are interested in the full-length, slower-paced netcode analysis videos for each of these games, then you can find a link to them in the description down below. As you know from my other videos, I like to use infographics and charts, so I created this graphic here to show you what each of these games has to offer. The first category is a strange one. Does the game require admin permissions to run? This is something that you usually won't encounter, as there is no reason why a game would need that level of unrestricted access to your PC. If a game needs an anti-cheat solution, then the developer usually uses a trusted service like Easy Anti-Cheat, which might run as a Windows service on the client of the player. So you will hardly come across a game that asks you for admin permissions when you run it. That is, unless you play Ring of Elysium, which does just that. The developers say that this is because of the anti-cheat solution they use, but having to allow the entire game to run with admin rights is a very bad practice. Also, even though the developer said last year that they will work on this, nothing has happened yet. Then, do these games provide a setting inside the options menu which allows the player to limit the frame rate, which is very useful when you want to play at a stable frame rate and so with a consistent input lag, or when you own a FreeSync or G-Sync monitor and want to keep the frame rate inside the variable refresh rate range of your monitor. Apex Legends and Ring of Elysium do not provide such a setting in their options menu. Blackout and PUBG provide a slider where the player can choose any value between 30 to 300 FPS, and Fortnite provides several presets for the player to choose from. Then, does any of these games provide a network graph, like you might know from Battlefield or CSGO, which allows players to troubleshoot network-related issues? Sadly, none of these games provides a setting in the options menu where you could enable such a feature. Then, does the game show warning icons to make the player aware of issues with his connection to the server, which have a very negative impact on his gameplay experience? Apex Legends, Blackout and Ring of Elysium do not have such icons, while in Fortnite and PUBG you will see icons that make you aware of high latency as well as packet loss. Can you enable a network overlay inside the options menu which will show you stats about your connection to the server? Apex Legends sadly does not provide such, while in Blackout and Ring of Elysium you can at least see your latency to the server while you are playing on that server. Fortnite as well as PUBG on the other hand show latency, packet loss, bandwidth usage, as well as how many packets are sent and received per second. That said, the latency or ping value in Fortnite has never worked correctly and is still broken. At an ICMP ping of 25 milliseconds to the game server, it shows values between 1 to 37 milliseconds, so it is still broken. The next one is related to the issue where players with a good connection to the server receive damage far behind cover when they get shot by players who have a bad connection to the server. Sadly, even when the shooter has a ping of more than 200 milliseconds to the game server, none of these games appear to care about what impact this has on the experience of players on the receiving end of that shot. They simply favor the shooter no matter what, which I find unacceptable, as dying behind a wall is especially frustrating in a Battle Royale game where you have just one life. It is surely unfortunate when a player has a bad connection to the server, but you simply cannot allow this player to have a negative impact on the experience of players who have a good connection to the server, as they did nothing wrong. I really hope that more developers will eventually do what DICE did in Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5, where the game stops to compensate the latency of the shooter once it exceeds a set threshold, which effectively limits how far behind cover a player with low ping will receive damage. You can find out more about that in my Netcode 101 video. The next one I talked about in greater detail in my Apex Legends netcode analysis. Are these games able to send just one data packet per update? Or does one update generate so much data that it must get split up across multiple packets, which potentially increases the risk of minor packet loss, resulting in the loss of an entire update? So, as I've shown you in my previous video, players receive up to 5 packets from the Apex Legends game servers in quick succession, as the data of one update is too large to fit into a single data packet. The same thing happens in Call of Duty Blackout, just that here I haven't seen the server send more than 4 packets per update. The fact that multiple packets are required to get one update to the client is why the send rate of the server in both games appears to decrease as the match progresses. But what really happens is that as the match goes on, the number of players who are still on the server gets lower, and so the server has less data to send to the player, which results in fewer split packets per update. Packet splitting is something that you don't want to have for time-sensitive data, as minor packet loss can already cause that a client misses an entire update. Now, what kind of network delay do two players experience when they play on the same server at a ping of about 25 milliseconds each? As always, I tested each game on multiple servers and on different times of the day to prevent that a single faulty server messes up the results. This time, the longest delays were not as bad as previously in Apex Legends. However, neither the shortest, nor the average, or the difference between shortest and longest delay are any good when you consider that the single trip delay between the player and the server is just 12 milliseconds. It is possible that the longest delays are a result of the packet splitting and minor packet loss, but since the game doesn't provide any network stats, it is impossible to say for sure. Blackout, where the server also must split the data of a single update into multiple packets in order to stay below the MTU or maximum transmission unit of the player's internet connection, shows shorter network delays than Apex Legends. But the sad thing here is that these delays are just as bad as when I tested Blackout the last time, which means that the developers did not improve the networking at all. The delays that I measured in Fortnite are also very similar to those from my last test, but that isn't a bad thing since these are still very short. The only thing that I find very annoying is that Epic Games can't seem to be bothered to fix that ping value, which is shown inside the network stats overlay. The story then continues with PUBG and Ring of Elysium, where I measured delays that are very similar to those from my previous tests. So, as you can see here, Fortnite provides the shortest network delays out of all the Battle Royale games I tested. The results from PUBG are quite solid, however, I'd wish that the delay for player movement would be shorter. Ring of Elysium, on the other hand, shows solid delays for damage and gunfire, but player movement has still way too much lag. The network delays in Blackout are frankly unacceptable, considering that these are still as bad as they were at launch. And I could not find a single official news or blog article from the developers about what they have planned for the future of this game, which means that we must assume that nothing is going to change. As I said in my previous video, I really like what Respawn Entertainment did to shake up the Battle Royale formula with Apex Legends, as it provides a fresh and extremely fun gameplay experience. What I'm not too happy about is that the networking side, which includes things like a network stats overlay and network warning icons, did not seem to get as much attention as other aspects of the game. But since Apex Legends is such a success, and the fact that EA is looking for a senior network engineer to work on Apex Legends, I do have high hopes that I will soon be able to tell you about the developers reducing those network delays and adding other quality of life features that players expect from online multiplayer games these days. So these are the facts, which are meant to help players to understand how the game or games they play are doing when compared to other similar games. If the game that you are a fan of also happens to have good networking, then you should simply thank the developers for putting in the extra effort. But don't use that information to attack fans of a game that is competing with yours, which did not do so well in my tests. Nothing good will come out of that. Your time is better spent enjoying the game that you are a fan of. On the other side of the spectrum, there are players who get very defensive when the game they like does not do so well in my tests. Developers, however, understand that they must recognize and work on the shortcomings of their product to allow it to grow and improve, otherwise the competition will eventually swoop in and take away your player base. So if you are a fan of a game that did not do so well in my tests, then it is in your own interest to have the developers recognize which aspects of the game need their attention, as that will only make the game better. And that's all for today. I will keep an eye out on all these games and do an update video should something change. If you enjoyed this netcode analysis update, then it would be great if you could support me on Patreon. Without the awesome support that I get from my patrons, battle nonsense would not exist anymore. You can find a link to my Patreon in the description down below, where you will also find links to my social accounts in case that you want to stay up to date on the videos that I'm working on. So if you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like, subscribe for more, and I hope to see you next time. Until then, have a nice day and take care. My name is Chris, and this was Battle Nonsense.